most of the stories of the judges are about military conquests of one sort or another. And once they've, finished the conquering, that's the way the story ends. Jephthah, I'm sure, conquered someone. But no one remembers Jephthah for the military victory that he achieved on behalf of Israel. And everyone knows Jephthah from what happens when he gets home.
But it's maybe worthwhile reflecting, for starters, on who Jephthah was. Who was he? What made him so attractive? What made him into a hero in the first case? Well, Jephthah the Gileadite, the son of a prostitute. Is this prejudicing us against him right at the start, or not? Because it was a mighty warrior. Gilead was the father of Jephthah. Gilead's wife also bore him sons, and when his wife's sons grew up, they drove Jephthah away, saying, "You shall not inherit anything in our father's house, for you are the son of another woman." And so Jephthah fled from his brothers and lived in the land of Tov, and outlaws collected around Jephthah and went riding with him.
Yeah, it's a rags to riches story in a sense. It's also a little bit of a proto-David story, right? Who also gets kicked, gets thrown out into the wilderness and collects a band around him. The prostitute, I suppose that's probably signaling, again, some of this rags to riches. You wouldn't have expected it.
Yeah.
But as we've already seen, prostitutes play a somewhat significant role.
Yeah.
And this is clear even more so once you get into the New Testament and you get the genealogy of Jesus right at the beginning. So I don't want to put too much on that aspect of it. But for sure, Jephthah is a hero who you can root for as an underdog, no?
You can. I think of Ned Kelly, if you're familiar, the bushranger. Jesse James.
Uh-huh.
The analogies, with these 19th century Wild West kind of stories, I think quite striking. An outsider, not really a villain.
Sure.
Actually, you have to have some sympathy for him. He was driven out.
Right.
But his main claim to fame to begin with is that he's tough. He had to survive. They're outlaws, sons of Belial, as they'd say. Sons of Belial means, good for nothing.
Yep.
Good for nothing in some ways, but nonetheless quite capable. And when a problem comes up, when the Ammonites, in this case, come against Israel, whoever the local Israel was, who do you want? You want the gang leader.
Sure.
So that's what they do, is they go to enlist this gang leader.
Yeah. Again, reminding us of the sort of the very local flavor of these stories.
And now, then he goes around to rally his troops. And this is the fateful moment in the story. The Spirit of the Lord came upon Jephthah, and he passed through Gilead and Manasseh. And he made a vow to the Lord and said, "If you will give the Ammonites into my hand, then whoever comes out of the doors of my house to meet me when I return victorious from the Ammonites shall be the Lord's, to be offered up by me as a burnt offering." Okay. Now, why does he make this vow?
Vows were incredibly powerful mechanisms for literally swaying the deity in your
We've
direction.
several stories. We have them from ancient Greece as well as from Israel. We have is it a Moabite king at one point when the battle is going against him, kills his son and sacrifices his son. So what is he vowing?
He's vowing a burnt offering, right? Which means something's going to be sacrificed in its entirety on the altar. But obviously, and this is the part that I think is really hard for some people to remember, it sounds so ridiculous now to say the first thing that comes out of my house, because in our world, the only things that come out of your houses are people and maybe a pet that you let out when the door was open. And what people don't remember or realize is that in ancient Israel, domestic animals were kept inside the house. Sheep, maybe cows, would have been living, alongside the humans on the first floor probably of the house.
Yeah.
So for sure, he did not mean to sacrifice, he didn't mean for a human to walk out.
I'm not so sure about that.
Really?
Because, now, if he was open to whatever comes out, what if he had a dog? Would he have sacrificed a dog?
No, I suppose not. You can't sacrifice dogs.
Yeah.
But you can't. But you're not supposed to sacrifice humans either, John.
Ooh, who says?
Well, I mean, all right. So the laws of Leviticus suggest that you shouldn't.
Yeah, but the laws of Leviticus are surely not operative in the world of Jephthah.
Even in the world of the story, they're not operative.
Yeah.
That's
So now, did Abraham think that you're not supposed to sacrifice a human being?
Is there a difference between God told me to do something and I made a vow of my own accord?
I wonder how big a difference is it. Now, one of the things that strikes me here is he's under the influence when he makes this vow. He's
Is that
under
what
the influence of the
it
Spirit.
now?
Yes.
But
so is he, if he's under the influence of the Spirit, is that so different?
What I would say is, certainly is the case that sacrificing of humans, when it does happen, as in the story that you just told, not just the Abraham one, but more tellingly the Mesha story from 2 Kings 3, it is something that happens in moments of duress. It's not I don't think it's a day-to-day occurrence. Right. It's I need something very badly, and I am willing to give up potentially the most precious thing to me in order to achieve this. And both of those stories, in both this one and the Moabite one, it is an individual sacrifice for a corporate good. Yeah. And I think that's an interesting aspect of it.
Yeah.
But you're suggesting, and I don't know that I've ever heard you say this before. Maybe that's because I wasn't listening. You were suggesting that when Jephthah says the first thing that walks out of my house I'm going to sacrifice, he kind of thought maybe it'll be a person.
Yeah. Because, as you just said, if you're under duress, this is a big battle coming up. You need something special. When Mesha wanted to sacrifice something to Chemosh, he didn't go looking for a domestic animal. You go for the big one.
This is a good point.
And so you want something valuable. Mm-hmm. Now, evidently, he didn't expect it to be his daughter.
But who did he expect it to be?
Maybe his wife.
No, I mean...
but he probably had all sorts of servants and people who might have been coming in and out of the house. Uh-huh. And, maybe if a bull happened to wander out of the house, which is a little implausible.
You could say I really dodged a bullet on that one, sure.
Maybe that would have done. But I think it would have to be something very valuable. And I think it probably was meant to be a human being.
Okay, so now, what are you going to make you of the moral ethics and virtues and values in the Bible? Yeah. Talk to me about what it means then, if what you're suggesting is that Jephthah intended human sacrifice, and of course, not just intended, but when it comes down to it, goes through with, and God accepts as payment for the vow. This would seem to be a perfectly condoning of human sacrifice story. Do you have a problem with that?
I mean, I have a problem with it in a way, but I don't think God does in this story. Now, like a lot of these stories in Judges, in the New Testament, after the parables, sometimes Jesus says, "He that hath ears to hear, let him hear," which is tantamount to saying, what do you make of that? And I think this is such a story. It's told because it is so striking, so unusual, so dramatic, that you say, wow. But it's not at all clear you're supposed to approve of it or disapprove of it.
So what's the lesson we're supposed to learn from this? What's the lesson of the Jephthah and his daughter story?
The lesson of it is, be careful what vows you make.
That's the lesson. That's the lesson.
I mean, that's the lesson for me. Right, but I'm not sure that was the lesson now in antiquity necessarily.
Really? See, it seems to me that most people read this story and think of it as a story about, immediately ask the question about, this is a story about human sacrifice.
Yeah.
And I think that both of us think that that's a cultural practice that's simply in the background and is not actually, as you said, it's a wow factor, but it's not a story meant to say something good or bad about human sacrifice per se. I think it is for sure meant to say something about be careful what you vow, but be careful what you vow because you cannot undo it once it's about the power of vows. They work, and you have to follow through on them.
What do you think was the point of the story about Mesha sacrificing his son?
That story is, again, I don't think the point of that story is to tell us that child sacrifice works. I think it does tell us that child sacrifice works. I think that story is mostly told as an explanation for why Israel lost. Mesha went and did the craziest thing you can do.
Yeah.
And as a result, Israel's God had to be like, woof, I'm not fighting with you, you're crazy.
It's intrinsic to the story that the child sacrifice does work.
Absolutely,
and
absolutely works.
I'd say here too.
Absolutely.
This is one of these crazy things that happened, and wow, you should sit up and take notice. But it isn't at all clear, at the end of it then, should you approve, should you not approve? I think if you love your daughter, be careful that you don't make a vow that could apply to her.
Yeah, vows are
probably the thing that would come across from it. But it doesn't, say that vows are bad.
Well, it's true, but they're not bad. I mean, vows are a major topic across the Bible, both in legal portions in Numbers and Leviticus, and also in stories like this. We see people making vows all the time. Even in the book of Joshua, right? The reason the Gibeonites are still around is because Joshua makes a vow using the name of the Lord. Mm-hmm. And even though the result of that vow is he has to go against something God commanded him explicitly, he's like, I made a vow. I'm stuck. I have to follow through on it.
Yeah.
Vows are of serious weight and import, but they are also dangerous and shouldn't be made rashly. And one of my favorite, when you read later early rabbinic commentaries and discussions, because there are laws about vows, they go through an awful lot of detail. How does one make a vow? What is the correct wording for a vow? How does one get out of a vow? What are who can make a vow for whom? And they give you all these laws, piles and piles of laws about how vows work, and regularly dot those laws by saying, but also never make a vow. Like, you should never, ever do this. This is a terrible idea, but if you're gonna, you're gonna.
You're stuck. And as indeed Jephthah's daughter admits. She says, it's okay, Daddy, you made the vow. You got to keep it. Just give me a couple of weeks to bewail my virginity, which is, an interesting...
As we come to the end of the discussion, we can think also about the very end of the story, which is a strange, almost out of the blue etiology and this is why, maidens in Israel go and I don't know what.
Yes, but now, do you think the fact that, Abraham doesn't have to go through with it? He hadn't made a vow, sure, but does the fact that Jephthah presumably does go through with it, and Abraham doesn't have to, does that say something? If this had been Isaac, would there have been a loophole somehow?
It certainly helps that Jephthah's daughter is not necessary in any way for the continuation of Israel. Yeah. And that sort of allows the story to be as shocking as it is. Nothing bad can really happen to Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, etc.
Yeah. Yeah.
Again, one of the reasons that I think the stories in Judges are so much fun is because they're looser and freer. And this is a really good example of that.